Eve-teasing. It's a term a lot of us have probably heard, but what does it actually mean in the eyes of the law? In this explainer, we're going to cut through all the noise to understand how the legal system defines this, and, maybe more importantly, how it punishes this kind of harassment. So, let's dive right in.
So let's just get right to the big question. Is eve-teasing actually a crime in India? Well, the short answer is, it's a little complicated. See, for a really long time, that exact term just wasn't in the legal code. Instead, these kinds of actions were handled using let's call it a patchwork of broader laws.
To really get a grip on this, we need to look at two things. First, what laws are already on the books that could cover this? And second, what about the proposals to create a brand new specific crime actually called eve-teasing? So yeah, before we look at what's new, we've got to understand what's old. What's the legal toolkit that already exists to deal with this kind of behavior? Okay, let's start with a big one. Section 509 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, this is a pretty broad law that really targets non-physical harassment. So we're talking about stuff like offensive words, lewd gestures, or even showing an object, all with the intention of insulting a woman's modesty. And that word right there, intent, that's the key. All right, so what happens if someone violates Section 509? What are the consequences? Well, the punishment is up to 3 years of what's called simple imprisonment plus a fine. Think of this as our baseline, our starting point, as we start looking at other more serious offenses. Next up, we have Section 354, and this is where we see a shift from the non-physical to the physical. This law covers assault, or the use of what's called criminal force. So, in other words, unwanted physical contact, with that same intent to outrage a woman's modesty. And this is where you see a major jump in the punishment. For Section 354, we're not just talking up to. There's a mandatory minimum of 1 year in prison, and it can go all the way up to 5 years plus a fine. This tells you right away that the law sees physical violations as a whole lot more serious. Okay, so with that context in mind, let's now look at the push to move beyond these kinds of broad categories. Lawmakers basically said, hey, maybe we need a specific offense, something that gives the term eve-teasing its own clear legal identity.
And here it is. This slide shows you the actual text of that proposed new law, Section 376F. Now, this is a really big deal because for the very first time, it would make eve-teasing a specific, legally defined crime right there in the Indian Penal Code.
So if we break down all that legal language, what are the key parts? Well, first, there's the intent to annoy. Then you've got those familiar actions, words, sounds, gestures. And then there are two really crucial conditions. It has to happen in a public place, and the woman has to be the intended audience. You know, she's the one it's directed at. All right, so we've got the old framework and this new proposal. So how do the punishments stack up? This is super important because the penalty really reveals how seriously the legal system takes a crime. Right, so if this becomes a new, specific crime, what are the real-world consequences? What's the punishment? Let's see how it compares to the laws we've already talked about. 5 years. The proposed punishment under a new Section 376G would be imprisonment for up to 5 years, along with a fine. Not 1, not 3, but a maximum of 5 years. Just let that sink in for a second.
This table right here is where it all comes together. Just look at the 3 rows. You've got Section 509 for insulting modesty. That's a max of 3 years. Then you have Section 354 for actual physical assault. That's a range of 1 to 5 years. And now look at the proposed law for eve-teasing. The maximum punishment? Also 5 years. This effectively puts it on the exact same legal footing as a physical assault. Wow, that is a really powerful statement.
Now, it's really important to get that this proposal didn't just appear out of nowhere. It wasn't created in a vacuum, right? It was part of a much, much larger conversation that was happening about how our laws should handle harassment and assault. For example, this wasn't the only idea on the table. Around the same time, the Law Commission actually suggested a different new offense, this one called unlawful sexual contact. And the idea here was to create a broad category that could cover all sorts of offenses, including things like sexual harassment in the workplace. So this proposal was really targeting any kind of touching that had a sexual intent but didn't have consent. It's just another example of the legal system trying to get more specific, creating distinct definitions for different types of violations, and of course, making sure each one has a punishment to match. So what's the big picture here? What are we really seeing? Well, it's a clear trend. The legal system is moving away from these broad, kind of catch-all laws like
insulting modesty, and moving toward these highly specific named offenses like Eve-teasing and unlawful sexual contact. The end goal? It's all about clarity and precision in the law.
And this whole journey brings us to a final and pretty crucial question. As the law gets more and more specific about defining what's wrong, how does it make sure that the punishments are applied fairly, proportionally, across this huge, complex landscape of human behavior? It's a really delicate balance, and it's one the legal system is constantly trying to get right.